Chapter 8. I spared Miss Watson's jib. The sun was up so high when I waked that I judged it was after 8 o'clock. I lay there in the grass, in the cool shade, thinking about things, and feeling rested and rather comfortable and satisfied. I could see the sun out at one or two holes, but mostly it was big trees all about, and gloomy in there amongst them. There was freckled places on the ground where the light sifted down through the leaves, and the freckled places swapped about a little, showing there was a little breeze up there. A couple of squirrels sat on a limb and jabbered at me very friendly. I was powerful lazy and comfortable. Didn't want to get up and cook breakfast. Well, I was dozing off again when I thinks I hears a deep sound of boom away up river. I rouses up and rests on my elbow and listens. Pretty soon I hears it again. I hopped up and went and looked out at the hole in the leaves, and I see a bunch of smoke laying on the water at long ways up about abreast of ferry, and there was a ferry boat full of people floating along down. I knowed what was the matter now. Boom! I see the white smoke squirt out of the ferry boat side. You see, they was firing a cannon over the water, trying to make my carcass come to the top. I was pretty hungry, but it weren't going to do for me to start a fire, because they might see the smoke. So I sat there and watched the cannon smoke and listened to the boom. The river was a mile wide there, and it always looked pretty on the summer morning. So I was having a good enough time seeing them hunt for my remainders if I only had a bite to eat. Well, then I happened to think how they always put quicksilver in loaves of bread and float them off, because they always go right to the drowned carcass and stop there. So, says I'll keep a lookout, and if any of them snarling around after me, I'll give them a show. I changed to the Illinois edge of the island to see what luck I could have, and I weren't disappointed. A big double loaf come along, and I most got it with a long stick, but my foot slipped and she floated out further. Of course, I was where the Kermit sat in the closet to the show. I knowed enough for that. By and by along comes another one, and this time I won. I took out the plug and shook out the little dab of quicksilver and set my teeth in. It was baker's bread, what the quality eat. None of your low-down corn pone. I got a good place amongst the leaves and sat there on a log munching the bread and watching the ferry boat, all very well satisfied. And then something struck me. I says, now I reckon the widow or the parsons or somebody prayed that this bread would find me, and here it has gone and done it. So there ain't no doubt but there's something in that thing. That is, there's something in it when a body like the widow or the parsons prays. But it don't work for me. I reckon it don't work for only just the right kind. I lit a pipe and had a good long smoke and went on watching. The ferry boat was floating with the current, and I allowed I'd have a chance to see who was aboard when she came along, because she would come in close, where the bread did. When she'd got pretty well along down towards me, I put out my pipe and went to where I fished out bread, and lay down behind a log on the bank in a little open place where the log forked I could peep through. By and by she came along, and she drifted in so close that they could have run about a plank and walked ashore. Most everybody was on boat. Pap and Judge Thatcher, and Bessie Thatcher, Joe Harper, Tom Sawyer, and his old Aunt Polly, and Sid and Mary, and plenty more. Everybody was talking about the murder, but the captain broke in and says, "Look sharp now. The Kermit sets in the closest here, and maybe he's washed ashore and got tangled amongst the brush at the water's edge. I hope so, anyway." I didn't hope so. They all crowded up and leaned over the rails, kneeling in my face, and kept still, watching with all their might. I could see them first rate, but they couldn't see me. Then the captain sung out, "Stand away!" and the cannon let out such a blast right before me that it made me deaf. with the noise and pretty near blind with the smoke. And I judge I was gone. If they had some bullets in, I reckon they got the course they was after. Well, I see I warn't hurt, thank to goodness. The boat floated on and went out of sight around the shoulder of the island. I could hear the booming now, and then further and further off. By and by, after an hour, I didn't hear it no more. The island was 3 mile long. I judged they had got to foot and was giving it up. But they didn't yet a while. They turned around the foot of the island and started up the channel on the Missouri side, under steam, and booming once in a while as they went. I crossed over to that side and watched them. When they got abreast ahead of the island, they quit shooting and dropped over to the Missouri shore and went home to the town. I knowed I was all right now. Nobody else would come a hunting after me. I got my traps out of the canoe and made me a nice camp in the thick woods. I made a kind of tent out of my blankets to put my things under so the rain couldn't get at them. I catched a catfish and haggled him open with my saw. And toward sundown, I started my campfire and had supper. Then I set out a line to catch some fish for breakfast. When it was dark, I set my campfire smoking, feeling pretty well satisfied. But by and by it got sort of lonesome, so I went and sat on the bank and listened to the currents washing along, and counted the stars and drift logs and rafts that come down, then went to bed. There ain't no better way to put in time when you're lonesome. You can't stay so. You soon get over it. And so for 3 days and nights, no difference, just the same thing. But the next day I went exploring around down through the island. I was boss of it, and it belonged to me, so to say, and I wanted to know all about it. But mainly I wanted to put in the time. I found plenty strawberries, ripe and prime, and green summer grapes and green raspberries. And the green blackberries was just beginning to show. They would all come handy by and by, I judged. Well, I went fooling along the deep woods till I judged I warn't far from the foot of the island. I had my gun along, but I hadn't shot nothing. It was for protection. Thought I would kill some game nigh home. About this time I mighty near stepped on a good-sized snake, and it was sliding off through the grass and flowers, and after it, trying to get a shot at it, I clipped along, and all of a sudden I bounded right onto the ashes of a campfire that was still smoking. My heart jumped amongst my lungs. I never waited for to look further, but uncocked my gun and went sneaking back on my tiptoes as fast as ever I could. Every now and then I stopped a second amongst the thick leaves and listened, but my breath come so hard I couldn't hear nothing else. I snuck along another piece further, then listened again, and so on and so on. If I see a stump, I took it for a man. If I tried on a stick and broke it, it made me feel like a person had cut one of my breaths in two, and I only got half, and the short half, too. When I got to camp, I warn't feeling very brash, and there warn't much sand in my craw. But I says this ain't no time to be fooling around. So I got all my traps into my canoe again so as to have them out of sight. And I put out the fire and scattered the ashes around to look like an old last year's camp, and then clumb a tree. I reckon I was up in the tree 2 hours, but I didn't see nothing. I didn't hear nothing. I only thought I heard and seen as much as 1,000 things. Well, I couldn't stay up there forever, so at last I got down, but I kept in the thick woods on the lookout all the time. All I could get to eat was berries, and what was left over for breakfast. By the time it was night, I was pretty hungry, so when it was good and dark, I slid out from the shore before moonrise and paddled over to the Illinois bank about 1/4 of a mile. I went out in the woods and cooked a supper, and I had about made up my mind I would stay there all night when I hear plunkety plunk, plunkety plunk, and says to myself, horses coming. And next I hear people's voices. I got everything into the canoe as quick as I could, and then went creeping through the woods to see what I could find out. I hadn't got far when I heard a man say, We better make camp here if we can't find a good place. The horses about beat out. Let's look around. I didn't wait, but shoved out and paddled away eagerly. I tied up the old place and reckoned I would sleep in the canoe. I didn't sleep much. I couldn't, somehow, for thinking. And every time I waked up, I thought somebody had me by the neck. So the sleep didn't do me no good. By and by, I says to myself, I can't live this way. I'm going to find out who it is that's here on the island with me. I'll find it out or bust. Well, I felt better right off. So I took my paddle and slid out from the shore just a step or two, and then let the canoe drop along down amongst the shadows. The moon was shining, and outside of the shadows it came at most as light as day. I poked along well on to an hour, everything still as rocks and sound asleep. Well, by this time I was most down to the front of the island. A little ripply, cool breeze begun to blow, and that was as good as saying the night was about done. I gave her a turn with the paddle and brung her nose to shore. I got my gun and slipped out and into the edge of the woods. I sat down on a log and looked out through the leaves. I see the moon go off watch, and the darkness begin to blanket the river. But in a little while, I see a pale streak over the treetops, and know the day was coming. So I took my gun and slipped off towards where I had run across that campfire, stopping every minute or two to listen. But I had no luck somehow. I couldn't seem to find the place. But by and by, sure enough, I catch a glimpse of fire away through the trees. I went for it, cautious and slow. By and by, I was close enough to have a look, and there laid a man on the ground. It most give me the fandons. He had a blanket around his head, and his head was nearly in the fire. I sat there behind the clump of bushes and about 6 foot of him, and kept my eyes on him steady. It was getting gray daylight now. Pretty soon he gaped and stretched himself and hovered off the blanket. And it was Miss Watson's Jim. I bet I was glad to see him. I says, "Hello, Jim," and skipped out. He bounced up and stared at me wild. Then he drops down on his knees and puts his hands together and says, "Don't hurt me. Don't. I ain't ever done no harm to a ghost. All I was like dead people, and done all I could for him. You go and get in the river again while you belongs, and don't do nothing, old Jim. All I was your friend." Well, I weren't long making him understand. I weren't dead. I was ever so glad to see Jim. I weren't lonesome now. I told him I weren't afraid of him telling the people where I was. I talked along, but he only sat there and looked at me, never said nothing. Then I says, "It's good daylight. Let's get breakfast. Make up your campfire good. What's the use of making up a campfire to cook strawberries in sich truck? Well, you got a gun, ain't you? Then we can get some better than strawberries." "Strawberries in such truck," I says. "Is that what you live on?" "I couldn't get nothing else," he says. "Why, how long have you been on the island, Jim?" "I come here the night after you was killed." "What, all that time?" "Yes, indeedy." "And ain't you had nothing but that kind of rubbish to eat?" "Nah, said nothing else." "Well, you must be most starved, ain't you? I reckon I could eat a hoss." "I think I could. How long you been in the island?" "Since night I got killed." "Oh, why has you lived on? But you got a gun." "Oh, yes, you got a gun. That's good. Now you kill some and I'll make up the fire." So we went over to where the canoe was, and while we built a fire in a grassy open place amongst the trees, I fetched veal and bacon and coffee and coffee pot, frying pan, and sugar and tin cups, and the nigger was set back considerable because he reckoned it was all done with witchcraft. I catch a good big catfish, too, and Jim cleaned him with his knife and fried him. When breakfast was ready, we lolled on the grass and eat it smoking hot. Jim laid it in with all his might, for he was most about starved. Then when he got pretty well stuffed, he laid off and lazed. By and by, Jim says, "But look a here, Huck, who was it that you killed in that shanty if it weren't you?" Then I told him the whole thing, and he said it was smart. He said Tom Sawyer couldn't get up no better plan than what I had. Then I says, "How do you come to be here, Jim? How did you get here?" He looked pretty uneasy, and then he said nothing for a minute. Then he says, "Maybe I better not tell." "Why, Jim?" "Well, there's reasons. But you wouldn't tell on me if I was to tell you, would you, Huck?" "Blamed if I would, Jim." "Well, I believe you, Huck. I run off." "Jim!" "But mind, you know you said you wouldn't tell, Huck." "Well, I did. I said I wouldn't, and I'll stick to it. Honest Injun, I will. People would call me a low-down abolitionist and despise me for keeping mum. But that don't make no difference. I ain't going to tell, and I ain't going back there anyways. So now, that's known all about it. Well, you see, it is this way. Oh, Mrs. That's Miss Watson. She pecks on me all the time, and treats me putty rough. But she always says she wouldn't sell me down to Orleans. But I noticed there was a nigger trader round the place considerable lately, and I begun to get uneasy. Well, well, one night I creeps to the door putty late, and in the door weren't quite sheep. And I hear old missus tell the waiter she goin' to sell me down to Orleans, but she didn't want to. But she could get a $800 for me, and it was such a big stack of money she couldn't resist. The widow she tried to get her to say she couldn't do it, but I never waited to hear the rest. I lit out mighty quick, I tell you. I tuck out and shin down the hill and expect to steal a skiff along the shore, somewhere above the town. But there was people astir me yet, so I hid in the old Tumbletown cooper shop on the bank to wait for everybody to go away. Well, I was that all night. There was somebody round it all the time, long about 6 in the morning. Skiffs began to go by, and about 8 or 9 every skiff that went long was talking about how your pap come over to town and say you's killed. As the last skiffs was full of ladies and gentlemen going over for to see the place. Sometimes they pull up at the show in Texas race before they started across. So they talk. I got to know all about that killing. I was powerful sorry you's killed, Huck, but ain't no more now. I laid there under the shavings all day, and I was hungry, but I aren't freer, because I know the old missus and the widow is going to start the camp meeting right arter breakfast and gone all day. Even they know as I got off with the cattle. About daylight so they wouldn't expect to see me round the place. And so they wouldn't miss me till dark in the evening. The other servants would have missed me in case they'd shit it out and take a holiday soon as the old folks was out in the way. Well, when it come dark, I tuck out up the river road and went about 2 mile above to why they warn't no houses. I made up my mind about what I was going to do. You see, if I keep on trying to get away afoot, the dogs will track me. If I stole a skiff to cross over, they miss that skiff, you see. And they know about what I land on the other side. Why, to pick up my track. So I says a rabbit's what is after. And don't make no track. I see a light coming round the pit by and by. So I waited and I shoved a log ahead of me and swum more than half a way across the river and got in the most of the driftwood and keep my head down low and kinda swum against the current till the raft come along. Then I swum to their sternum and took a hold. Clouded up and it was pooty dark for a little while, so I clumb up and laid them on the planks. The men was all way yonder in the middle, while their land was. The river was rising, and there was a good current, so I reckon at by 4 in the morning I'd be 25 miles down the river, and then I slip in just before daylight and swim ashore and take the woods on the Illinois side. But I didn't have no luck. When we was most down to the head of her island, a man began to come aft with the land. I see it weren't no use for to wait, so I slid aboard and struck out for the island. Well, I had a notion I could land most anywheres, but I couldn't bank to Spluff. I was most the foot of the island before I found a good place. I went into the woods and judged I wouldn't find with rafts no more, long as they move the land round so. I had my pipe and a plug, long leg, and some matches in my cap, and they weren't wet, so I was all right. And so you ain't had no meat nor bread to eat all this time? Why didn't you get mud turkles? How are you going to get 'em? You can't slip up on 'em and grab 'em. And how's a body going to hit 'em with a rock? How could a body do it in the night? And I weren't going to show myself on the bank in the daytime. Well, that's so. You had to keep in the woods all the time, of course. Did you hear 'em shooting the cannon? Oh, yes. I know there was either you. I see 'em go by here. Watch 'em through the bushes. Some young birds come along, flying a yard or two at the time and lightning. Jim said it was a sign. It was going to rain. He said it was a sign when young chickens flew that way, and so he reckoned it was the same way when young birds done it. I was going to catch some of them, but Jim wouldn't let me. He said it was death. He said his father laid mighty sick once, and some of them catched a bird, and his old granny said the father would die, and he did. And Jim said you mustn't count the things you were going to cook for dinner because that would bring bad luck. Same if you shook the tablecloth after sundown. And he said if a man owned a beehive and that man died, the bees must be told about it before sunup next morning, or else the bees would all weaken down and quit work and die. Jim said bees wouldn't sting idiots. But I didn't believe that, because I had tried them lots of times myself, and they wouldn't sting me. I had heard about some of these things before, but not all of them. Jim knowed all kinds of signs. He said he knowed most everything. He said it looked to me like all the signs was about bad luck, so I asked him if there weren't any good luck signs. He says, mighty few, ain't they? Ain't no use to a body. You want to know when good luck a come for? Want to keep it off? And he said, if you's got hairy arms and hairy breasts, it's a sign you're going to be rich. Well, there's some use in a sign like that, case it's so far ahead. You see, maybe you's got to be poor a long time first, and so you might get discouraged and kill yourself if you don't know by the sign that you're going to be rich by and by. Have you got hairy arms and hairy breasts, Jim? What's the use to ask that question? Don't you see I has? Well, are you rich? No, but I've been rich once and gonna be rich again. Once I got $14, but I took to speculating and got busted out. What did you speculate in, Jim? Well, first I tackled stock. What kind of stock? Why, livestock. Cattle, you know. I put $10 in the cow, but I ain't gonna rest no more money in stock. The cow up and died on my hands. So you lost the $10. No, I didn't lose it all. I only lost about 9 of it. I sold the hide and tallow for $1.10. You have $5.10 left. Did you speculate any more? Yes. You know that one-legged nigger that belongs to old Mr. Brandish? Well, he sot up a bank and said everybody that put in $1 would get $4 more at the end of the year. Well, all the niggers went in, but they didn't have much. I was the only one that had much, so I stuck out for more than $4. And I said if I didn't get it, I'd start a bank myself. Well, of course, that nigger want to keep me out of the business because he says they weren't business enough for 2 banks. So he said I could put in $5 and pay them $35 at the end of the year. So I done it. Then I reckon I invest the $35 right off and keep things a moving. There was a nigger named Bob that had catched the wood flat, and his marster didn't know it. And I bought it off him and told him to take the $35 when the end of the year come, and But somebody stole that wood flat that night, and next day that one-legged nigger say the bank's busted. So they didn't none of us get no money. What did you do with the 10 cents, Jim? Well, I was going to spend it, but I had a dream, and the dream told me to give it to a nigger named Balaam. Balaam Ass, they call him for short. He's one of them chuckleheads, you know, but he's lucky, they say, and I seen I warn't lucky. The dream said let Balaam invest the 10 cents and he'd make a raise for me. Well, Balaam took the money, and when he was in the church, he heard the preacher say that whoever give that poor lend to the Lord and bound to get his money back 100 times. So Balaam he took in, give the 10 cents to the poor, and laid low to see what was going to come of it. Well, what did come of it, Jim? Nothing ever come of it. I couldn't manage to clutch that money, no way. Balaam he couldn't. I ain't gonna lend no more money without I see the security. If I want to get your money back 100 times, the preacher says, if I could get the 10 cents back, I'd call it squaw and be glad of the chance. Well, it's all right anyway, Jim, long as you're going to be rich again sometime or other. Yes, and I's rich now, come to look at it. I owns myself, and I worth $800. I wished I had the money. I wouldn't want no more.